In the dark waters off Guadalcanal, whispers spread among Japanese sailors tales of an American cruiser, whose guns fired so fast they sounded like machine guns ripping through fabric. They weren't exaggerating. This is the story of the USS Helena CL-50, the ship that survived Pearl Harbor, defied the odds, and returned with a vengeance that would forever reshape naval warfare in the Pacific. Known as the ship that refused to die, Helena's legend wasn't built on luck, it was forged through firepower, courage, and 1,000 men who turned a light cruiser into a weapon of destiny. In a time when battleships ruled the seas and aircraft carriers were the future, Helena proved that speed, precision, and willpower could rewrite history. But her journey didn't begin in battle, it began during the Great Depression, when America was rebuilding both its economy and its navy. The new Street Louis-class cruisers were designed with a revolutionary idea: deliver overwhelming firepower without sacrificing speed. When Helena's keel was laid at the Brooklyn Navy Yard in December 1936, few imagined the fate awaiting hull number 50. The workers riveting her steel plates weren't just building a ship, they were crafting an instrument of survival and vengeance. At 608 feet long with a 61-foot beam, Helena sliced through the ocean like a blade. But her real power came from her 15 6-inch Mark 16 guns arranged in 5 triple turrets. Each gun could fire 8 to 10 rounds per minute, meaning her full broadside could unleash up to 150 shells every 60 seconds. It's no wonder the Japanese would come to call her the machine gun cruiser. Her secondary arsenal, 8 dual-purpose 5-inch guns, could just as easily swat down aircraft as obliterate destroyers. Powered by 4 Parsons turbines producing 100,000 horsepower, she could tear across the Pacific at 32.5 knots, with the endurance to travel 10,000 nautical miles without stopping. But numbers tell only part of Helena's story. What made her extraordinary was her crew, 868 officers and sailors who transformed cold steel into something close to immortal. Launched into the East River on the 27th of August 1938, and christened by a senator's wife from Montana, Helena entered the world under a promise of good fortune. Whether that promise was kept depends on how you define luck. Her early voyages seemed peaceful, almost idyllic. After her commissioning in September 1939, she sailed south to Uruguay, where fate offered a grim preview of what was coming. In Montevideo Harbor, her crew saw the burned-out remains of the German pocket battleship Graf Spee, scuttled after the Battle of the River Plate. The sight was haunting a glimpse of the future that awaited all great ships of war. And for the USS Helena, that future was fast approaching. Young American sailors stared at the twisted steel, wondering if they were staring at their own fate. The Pacific called, and the USS Helena answered. By September 1940, she joined the Pacific Fleet, spending months in Hawaiian waters, honing her deadly precision. Gunnery drills, navigation training, and damage control exercises turned once ordinary civilians into hardened warriors. As 1941 neared its end, Helena entered the Mare Island Navy Yard for upgrades. The Navy, perhaps sensing the storm on the horizon, armed her with new 1.1-inch anti-aircraft guns, like giving a boxer brass knuckles before a street fight. On the quiet morning of December 7th, 1941, Helena rested at berth 1,010 inches, Pearl Harbor's Navy Yard. Across the harbor, battleships lined up neatly along Ford Island. The mighty USS Pennsylvania, queen of the battle line, was supposed to occupy Helena's berth, but fate had other plans. At 7:57 a.m., Lieutenant Commander Shigeharu Murata led 9 Japanese Kate torpedo bombers toward what he thought was Pennsylvania. Through the morning haze, Helena's profile was close enough to seal her fate. Only one torpedo was released, a Type 91 that sped through the harbor waters at 40 knots. It slipped beneath the moored minelayer Oglala and slammed into Helena at frame 75, just below her armor belt. The blast ripped through her engineering spaces like a giant's fist. Engine Room 1 and Boiler Room 2 became twisted metal tombs in an instant. Seawater rushed in through a hole big enough to drive a truck through, but Helena was already fighting back. Within 2 minutes, her forward diesel generator roared to life, restoring power to her guns. As enemy planes circled for their second wave, Helena's anti-aircraft batteries opened fire with defiant fury. 4 bombs narrowly missed her during the next attack, each near miss raining shards of steel across her decks. The ship that should have died stayed afloat, held together by miracles of discipline, courage, and sheer willpower. 40 sailors lay dead, more than 100 wounded, but Helena lived. In the wardroom, blood mixed with oil as medics fought to save the dying. On deck, gunners stood their ground even as comrades fell beside them. Japanese pilots reported her sinking a fatal mistake. They had only awakened a sleeping giant's little sister, and she would remember. In the days after the attack, Helena looked like a patient in intensive care. Water sloshed through her ruptured hull as pumps worked non-stop to keep her alive. But beneath the scars, her heart still beat strong. By December 9th, just 2 days later, Helena entered dry dock No. 2. Navy Yard workers swarmed over her like surgeons, cutting and welding steel plates over her wounds. The temporary repairs would have to hold until she could reach Mare Island in January 1942. That voyage tested every weld, every rivet, and every sailor's resolve. Through storm-tossed Pacific swells, the wounded ship pressed on her crew, ever ready to fight the sea itself. Because Helena was more than steel. She was spirit, courage, and survival, the first to bleed, but never the first to fall. They had no reason to worry. Helena was far tougher than she looked. At Mare Island, the cruiser underwent a transformation that went far beyond repairs. The U.S. Navy had learned hard lessons from Pearl Harbor, and Helena became the embodiment of that newfound wisdom. Her old conning tower, which once limited visibility during night battles, was replaced by an open bridge, a modern design where the outdated Chicago pianos, the old 1.1-inch guns, once stood. In their place, crews mounted 4 quadruple 40mm. Bofor's guns, Swedish precision wrapped in American steel. But Helena's true rebirth came not from her armor, but her electronics. She received the revolutionary SG surface search radar, a technological marvel that could pierce darkness and fog to reveal enemy ships miles away, as if seeing through magic. Combined with new FC and FD fire control radars, Helena could fight blind, striking targets no human eye could see. Under Captain Robert H. English, and later Captain Charles P. Cecil, the crew trained with relentless discipline. They had debts to settle. Gunners drilled until they could reload and fire in their sleep. Damage control teams rehearsed sealing breaches and fighting fires until their responses were second nature. Every man aboard knew their purpose. They were returning to the Pacific, not as victims, but as hunters. In the mess halls, sailors whispered about revenge. In the engine rooms, mechanics pushed every turbine to its limit. Helena wasn't just repaired, she was reborn as an instrument of vengeance. By July 1942, Helena was ready. As she passed beneath the Golden Gate Bridge, bound for the South Pacific, her crew lined the rail. Some waved to loved ones ashore. Others stared westward toward the enemy that had drawn first blood. The machine gun cruiser was heading to war. The Solomon Islands, late 1942, a green hell where the U.S. and Japan bled for every inch of jungle. Guadalcanal, with its crucial airfield, had become the grinding wheel of the Pacific War. Each night, Japanese ships raced down the slot, the narrow channel between the Solomon chain, bringing reinforcements and raining shells on American positions. By early October, Helena joined Task Force 64 under Rear Admiral Norman Scott. Unlike many admirals still obsessed with battleship formations, Scott understood that radar and rapid fire would rule the dark waters of the Solomons. He drilled his men for night combat relentlessly, though curiously, he chose USS San Francisco as his flagship instead of the radar-equipped Helena. Then came the 11th of October, 1942. American reconnaissance planes spotted Admiral Aritomo Goto's force steaming toward Guadalcanal. 3 heavy cruisers and 2 destroyers loaded with reinforcements and bombardment shells. Scott moved his task force off Cape Esperance, ready to spring the trap. As darkness fell, Helena's SG radar operator, Radioman 3rd Class Robert S. Brown, hunched over his glowing scope. At 11:25 p.m., a faint phosphorescent blip appeared. Enemy ships 27,700 yards away. Helena had found the Japanese before they even knew the Americans were there. What followed was controlled chaos. Scott, operating from the blind bridge of San Francisco, ordered a maneuver that accidentally placed his ships across the Japanese T, the perfect ambush position. On Helena's bridge, Captain Gilbert C. Hoover, now in command, grew increasingly frustrated. His radar showed enemy ships barely 5,000 yards away, point-blank range, but no order to fire had come. Finally, at 11:46 p.m., an ambiguous Roger from Scott was taken as permission. Helena's guns, already locked and loaded, unleashed their fury. In an instant, the night over the Solomon Sea exploded in fire. Helena had drawn first blood. The first salvo hit the Japanese heavy cruiser Alba, completely off guard. 6-inch shells smashed into her bridge, killing Admiral Goto instantly and wounding her captain. The Japanese admiral died believing his own ships were firing on him. He never imagined that Americans could strike from the darkness with such deadly precision. From the cruiser Helena, her guns roared with impossible speed. Brass casings rolled across the decks like golden rain as the crew worked in perfect rhythm. The relentless flashes of her guns lit up the night sky, earning Helena a chilling nickname that would follow her to the grave. When the heavy cruiser Furutaka moved in to shield her flagship, she sailed straight into a hurricane of steel. Helena's shells found her torpedo tubes, and Japan's feared long-lance torpedoes exploded right on deck. Furutaka burned like a Viking funeral ship before slipping beneath the black waters. In just 14 minutes, it was over. Helena had fired more than 1,400 rounds, her gun barrels glowing cherry red. The Battle of Cape Esperance became America's first clear surface victory against the Imperial Japanese Navy. Helena had proven that U.S. cruisers could fight and win at night, the enemy's chosen battlefield. As dawn broke, oil slicks and drifting debris marked the graves of Japanese warships. The exhausted but exhilarated crew of Helena tasted their first victory, and it would not be their last. By November 1942, desperation gripped both sides at Guadalcanal. The Japanese prepared a massive reinforcement convoy, while Admiral Scott's victorious task force, now under Rear Admiral Daniel Callaghan, stood as the only barrier. Callaghan, brave but inexperienced in night combat, made one critical mistake. He chose San Francisco as his flagship instead of the radar-equipped Helena. On the night of November 12-13, Helena's radar once again proved prophetic. At 0124 hours, her SG scope detected Japanese ships slipping into iron-bottom sound waters so full of wrecks they had earned that grim name. 2 Japanese battleships, Haie and Kirishima, led a bombardment force meant to obliterate Henderson Field. What followed at 0148 was less a naval engagement and more a bar fight with battleships. The American and Japanese columns practically collided in the darkness, ships firing at point-blank range, often unsure whether they were hitting friend or foe. Searchlights stabbed through the night. Starshells burst overhead. Tracers crisscrossed like deadly fireworks. While chaos reigned, Helena's radar-guided fire control gave her a razor-sharp edge. She opened up on what her crew believed was a battleship, likely Haie, at just 4,200 yards. Her rapid salvos walked up and down the target, igniting fires and detonating explosions. Then the Japanese destroyer Akatsuki made a fatal mistake, illuminating Helena with her searchlight. Every American gun that could bear instantly targeted the glowing destroyer. Helena's 6-inch shells joined 5- and 8-inch salvos from other ships, obliterating Akatsuki in a single blinding explosion. Only a handful of her crew survived. Without pause, Helena shifted fire to 3 more destroyers. Her guns cycled so fast that Japanese survivors later swore Americans had invented a new kind of automatic cannon. 1 destroyer drifted away burning. Another lay dead in the water, and the third fled into the dark, trailing smoke. Through it all, Helena danced between salvos, her engineers pushing the turbines to their very limits. On that night, amid chaos, courage, and flame, the Helena forged her legend in fire. At one point, the USS San Francisco crossed directly between Helena and her target, forcing Helena's crew to hold their fire a moment that likely saved countless American lives. But not everyone was so fortunate. That chaotic night saw tragic friendly fire incidents that claimed the lives of Admiral Callahan and Captain Casson Young of the San Francisco, two brave men struck down by their own side in the confusion of close combat. For 40 brutal minutes, the battle raged at point-blank range, a storm of metal, fire, and chaos. When it was finally over, the Japanese forces pulled back, their battered ships riddled with holes and burning. One battleship, her rudders jammed and decks shattered by dozens of hits from Helena and others, lingered behind. By dawn, American aircraft finished the job, sending her beneath the waves, the first Japanese battleship lost in the war. Helena herself had come through with minor damage and only one man lost, but her guns were scorched after firing more than 1,500 rounds in that single night. Her relentless barrage had helped stop the dreaded Tokyo Express, protecting Henderson Field and ensuring that U.S. planes could launch the devastating counterstrikes that followed. As November 13th dawned, the waters of Iron Bottom Sound lived up to their name, littered with fresh wrecks resting on the seafloor. Helena had once again proven her worth, but every victory came at a heavier cost.
Between these legendary clashes, life aboard Helena was a different kind of battle, one against exhaustion, heat, and disease. The Solomon Islands offered no mercy. If Japanese shells didn't kill you, tropical illnesses might. The crew developed the 1,000-yard stare of men aged beyond their years, worn down by endless vigilance. Each day followed the rhythm of war general quarters at dawn and dusk when submarines like to strike, long hours bombarding jungle, positions on Guadalcanal, and nights spent patrolling the deadly slot with radar crews scanning for the next threat. Despite the tension, the crew forged their own sense of humor and brotherhood. Helena's laundry crew became famous for somehow keeping uniforms crisp even after battle. The ship's band, Helena's hotshots, filled the deck with swing music between fights, their jazz tunes drifting across the dark Pacific. Meals were simple: spam, powdered eggs, and coffee strong enough to float a wrench. Fresh vegetables were a memory, but when the ice cream machine worked, it was pure gold. Men would trade anything for a Dixie cup of vanilla. Through it all, Captain Hoover remained a steady, unshakable leader. Unlike glory-seeking officers, he knew that in these deadly waters, survival itself was victory. He drilled his crew relentlessly, yet knew exactly when to ease the strain. Movie nights on the fantail, boxing matches on the forecastle, small luxuries that reminded his men why they fought. But on November the 23rd, the sudden relief of Captain Hoover hit the crew like a torpedo. He was removed for failing to properly report the sinking of the USS Juno, a decision many saw as bureaucratic punishment. After surviving hell together, the men were stunned to lose their skipper. His replacement, Captain Charles P. Ceci, took command in December 1942 and faced the challenge of earning the crew's trust. Under his leadership, they would fight through their final grueling battles. As December 1942 faded into January 1943, the days blurred with exhaustion and duty. The USS Helena bombarded Vila and Munda, escorted convoys, and chased phantom radar contacts. Her crew had become masters of instinct, reading the sea and sky, spotting danger a second before it struck. By February 1943, Helena was worn thin. Her engines coughed, her guns were tired, and her hull carried scars from near misses. The voyage to Sydney, Australia felt like a voyage to paradise. Fresh food, cold beer, and laughter from English-speaking voices. For a few fleeting weeks, Helena's men remembered what peace felt like. But there were never pauses. By April, Helena was back in the Solomons, guns refurbished and crew refreshed, ready for the next brutal chapter of the island campaign. Spring turned to summer, and American forces prepared to climb the Solomon chain toward New Georgia, the next bloody step toward Tokyo. Helena played her part with precision, unleashing devastating bombardments that reduced enemy strongholds to rubble. By now, the mission was a deadly routine: slip into hostile waters at night, strike with ruthless efficiency, and vanish before dawn's retribution. On May the 13th, Helena led a bombardment group against Vila, her shells walking methodically through fuel dumps and barracks. The Japanese had learned to move assets inland, but Helena's guns still found targets to destroy. Then came June 1943, operations intensified. Intelligence warned of massive Japanese reinforcements, and every American cruiser was pushed to the limit. Helena's men loaded extra ammunition, reinforced bulkheads, and wrote letters home just in case. On June the 30th, during Operation Toenails, the invasion of New Georgia began. Helena provided fire support for the landings at Rendova, her 6-inch guns clearing jungle in wide 100-yard swaths. The machine gun cruiser was back in her element, and her war was far from over. Japanese shore batteries fired back sporadically, their shells splashing closer and closer to the cruiser, USS Helena, until her counter battery guns silenced them for good. It was July the 4th, 1943, Independence Day, and Helena celebrated it in her own way, unleashing bombardment on Munda Airfield. The Japanese had strengthened their anti-aircraft defenses, and soon the sky filled with black bursts of flak. Helena's gunners answered with streams of 40mm fire, the tracer rounds cutting brilliant arcs across the night, a fireworks display of democracy versus fascism. That evening, Helena refueled at Tulagi, taking on oil and ammunition for another night's mission. Intelligence had detected another Tokyo Express Run destroyers racing south with reinforcements for New Georgia. Task Force 68, with Helena at its heart, prepared to intercept them in Kula Gulf. The crew sensed this mission was different. Maybe it was the full moon stripping away the darkness that usually protected them. Maybe it was the reports of Japanese heavy cruisers joining the run. Or maybe it was fate. Helena had survived too many battles unscathed. Just after midnight on July the 6th, 1943, the moon rose over Kula Gulf, turning the sea silver and exposing the Americans. Admiral Walden Ainsworth aboard USS Honolulu led the task force into the Gulf. Helena's radar, among the best in the fleet, quickly picked up enemy contacts to the northwest. Across the water, Admiral Teruo Akiyama's Japanese Force 10 destroyers, armed with the deadly Type 93 Long Lance torpedoes, had also detected the Americans. Both fleets now closed the distance, fully aware that this would be a brutal fight where speed meant survival. At 1:57 a.m., Admiral Ainsworth gave the order to open fire. Helena's guns roared instantly, targeting the destroyer Niizuki, Akiyama's flagship. Her salvo struck with deadly precision, 6-inch shells tearing through Niizuki's decks, detonating her torpedoes and ripping the ship apart. Admiral Akiyama was killed within minutes, the flash of Helena's guns the last light he ever saw. But even as Nizuki sank, her fellow destroyers had already launched their long lance torpedoes, invisible killers racing through the dark water toward Helena. 10 Japanese destroyers unleashed a deadly storm, volleys of torpedoes slicing through the dark waters of Kula Gulf. Nearly 50 long lance torpedoes surged toward the American fleet, each one a streak of silent death beneath the waves. The USS Helena locked onto the destroyer Suzuki, her radar, guided guns roaring in defiance. Salvo after salvo found their mark, but then came the fatal mistake. Helena had used up her precious flashless powder, the kind meant for night battles. Switching to standard charges, her guns now lit up the sea like lightning, revealing her position to every Japanese torpedo crew watching. At 2:03 hours, Helena's luck ran out. 3 torpedoes slammed into her in quick succession. The first struck forward of turret 1. A catastrophic blast ripped through her bow, sending a fireball 200 feet into the air. Bulkheads buckled, decks twisted, and men were thrown like rag dolls. Moments later, 2 more torpedoes tore into her midsection. Her keel, the ship's spine, snapped in half. The mighty cruiser lost power. Her turbines screamed to a halt, and the ship began to jackknife into the sea. Captain Sissel realized the inevitable and gave the order no sailor ever wants to hear: abandon ship. Even as she sank, Helena refused to die quietly. Her aft turrets kept firing, the crews manually training their guns until seawater flooded the compartments. When the stern finally went under, she broke apart, her bow gone, her midsection sinking fast, and the stern drifting, carrying nearly 400 men still alive. The destroyer USS Nicholas braved enemy fire to rescue survivors, pulling oil-soaked sailors from the sea as Japanese ships closed in. By dawn on July the 6th, 1943, the waters of Kula Gulf were littered with debris and nearly 500 Helena men still fighting to survive. Admiral Ainsworth faced an agonizing choice. With enemy warships nearby and air attacks imminent, he ordered his ships to withdraw, leaving hundreds still adrift. Under the blazing tropical sun, surrounded by wreckage, sharks, and blood, Helena's survivors endured one of the war's most brutal nights, a testament to courage, sacrifice, and the cost of war, as the cruiser, USS Helena, broke apart in the dark waters of the Solomon Islands. Chaos turned into courage. Men formed small groups, helping the wounded and clinging to the few life rafts that remained. On the floating stern, section, Lieutenant Commander John L. Chu took charge. The wreckage still held a few supplies, food, water, and medical kits. Chu imposed discipline, organized watches, and rationed everything they had. When Japanese planes strafed the survivors, they dove beneath twisted steel for cover, refusing to surrender. That night, 2 American destroyers tried to reach them, but Japanese warships forced them back. The survivors endured another night surrounded by sharks, exhaustion, and fading hope. Then, a spark of salvation, Coast Watcher Reverend W.E. Sylvester, stationed on nearby Vella La Vella Island, spotted the drifting men and alerted Allied forces. He worked with local islanders, guiding rescuers through dangerous waters. On the night of July the 7th, American destroyers Nicholas and Jenkins, along with transports Dent and Waters, returned under cover of darkness. Using whaleboats and rubber rafts, they pulled 165 men from the wreckage. The stern of the USS Helena sank only after the last survivor was safe, as if the ship itself had waited to say goodbye. Yet 88 other men had drifted toward Japanese-held shores. For a week, they hid in the jungles of Vella La Vella, living off coconuts and rainwater, moving only under moonlight while native scouts shielded them from enemy patrols. Finally, on July the 16th, destroyers Taylor, Maury, Gidley, and Ralph Talbot launched a daring daylight rescue right under the eyes of Japanese forces, bringing every last survivor home. Of Helena's crew of 868, a total of 700 men survived. The rest gave their lives in one of the most heroic naval episodes of the Pacific War. The Navy later honored the USS Helena with 7 battle stars and the first ever Navy unit commendation awarded to a ship, citing her valor in the battles of Cape Esperance, Guadalcanal, and Kula Gulf. Helena's guns changed the course of battle. Her story became legend, a testament to bravery, resilience, and the will to fight on when hope seemed lost. Her mastery of radar-guided night combat set a new standard in naval warfare. The need for flashless powder was learned through blood and sacrifice, and from her loss came vital changes in U.S. Navy damage control procedures. For decades, the USS Helena lay silently in the depths of Kula Gulf, her exact location unknown. Her surviving crew gathered over the years, their ranks thinning but their memories vivid, their feddeens. They still recalled the thunder of her guns, the steel beneath their boots, and the brothers who never came home. Then, in April 2018, Paul Allen's research vessel RV Petrel discovered her at a depth of 2,800 feet. Remote cameras captured her hull number, 50 still, visible on her stern. Her turrets, frozen in position, seemed ready to continue the fight. For the surviving sailors and their families, the discovery finally brought closure. Today, Helena is more than a war grave. She's a monument to every sailor who fought in the decisive naval battles of World War I. Her story stands as a lasting lesson in courage, resilience, and sacrifice. Born in Depression-era Brooklyn and lost in the tropical waters of the Solomon Islands, Helena embodied the American war spirit. Built by workers in need of hope, manned by boys who became men, and led by officers learning a new kind of warfare, she was, quite literally, democracy forged in steel. The Japanese knew her as the machine gun cruiser, a ship of relentless firepower, but she was far more than her guns or her radar. She was 868 Americans who refused to surrender, who turned defeat at Pearl Harbor into victory at Cape Esperance and Guadalcanal. Even in her final moments, Helena fought back, her guns blazing until the sea swallowed her whole. Now, in the silent depths of Kula Gulf, coral grows on her turrets and fish drift through her passageways, yet her legacy endures. She remains, as her crew always knew her to be, one hell of a fighting ship.